G'day and welcome to Real Life. I'm John Cowan. With over 40 million copies of her work sold and 1,000 titles with her name on it, she's one of our top authors. You'll know her stories. Perhaps you learned to reading her stories, but wait till you hear her own story. Joy Cowley, welcome to Real Life.
Hello, John. Thank you for having me on the program.
Oh, it's my pleasure and honour. And are you keeping well? Because you've had a few birthdays now, haven't you?
Yes, I am keeping well. I'm losing my sight, but the rest of me seems fairly fit.
Are you still able to drive that hot little Mini Cooper around?
Oh, no, I had to give that back to my son.
Oh.
I've got macular degeneration, and I thought I'd start running off the road, so I had to give it back.
Well, I guess the people around Featherston should be grateful for that, I guess, that you're making that sacrifice for them.
Relief, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's one of the challenges of getting older, and I've read some lovely stuff that you've written about getting older and about how things like as your body ages, it's sort of there's almost a blessing with it as well. Well,
there are compensations. You don't really worry too much about appearance and how you affect people. I think we become kinder as we get older, simply because we have less stress, and we realise that the world is not such a bad place after all. Well, we come to a larger place in living, I think.
A larger place? What do you mean by that?
Well, I think that's... If someone asked me what I believe, and that person didn't have any specific religious context,
yes,
I would probably say, I believe that we come from a greater reality, we return to that greater reality, and our little time here in life school is for the growth of the soul. Life school.
I know I've heard it said that you say that when you look back on your life, it looks like a straight line from your childhood to your adulthood, as if everything was meant to be, and you learnt things along the way, and your troubles were a teacher.
That's so true. I mean, it's often been said that wisdom is a life experience well digested. It's the digesting that's important.
Well, I guess your writing, that gives you a chance to reflect and muse and wring out of each of life experiences what it might be teaching you.
Yes, it does. It does. And also, some of the structures of religion are important to me too. For example, right now it's Lent, and that's 40 days going towards the truth that death and resurrection occurs in our life time and time and time again. And this is a way of growth, because what is resurrected is always greater than what has died. And the only thing that can get in the way of that, I suppose, is getting stuck in the tomb with self-pity and bitterness and anger.
And so you're able to move through something. And look, I'd love to talk a little bit about some of the things in your past, because looking back at your life story, there were so many opportunities for you to have turned aside into bitterness and to failure and to all sorts of things, but you didn't. And
well, there was always someone there, I think, to advise me, some wise person. And when I felt that I had lost everything, it was an older woman who was a friend, who had a lot of problems herself in her life and who remained very positive in spite of that. She said, don't allow this to make you bitter. And that was such valuable wisdom at that time. So there's always somebody there. I really believe that we are given in this life everything that we need for the journey.
And some of the people prepare for that journey. Like, I was interested to read that your mother was a deeply religious woman, but somewhat troubled. But you had a Swedish grandmother.
Yes.
And
yes,
who was almost on sort of like Jesus's, almost first name basis.
She we lived next door.
Yes.
She had a sweetness to her that was almost palpable. And she was such a kind and gentle person. I don't think that she ever had a bad thought in her life. She was never angry or. troubles seemed to pass by her as though they were of no importance at all.
That must have been a lovely role model to have in a fairly troubled upbringing that you had.
Yes. My poor parents both had ill health, and it was very hard for them. So people tend to reflect their circumstances and what they believe. And if the life's a struggle, then I think that probably whatever they believe is pretty hard too. And what happens is they live in a divided world. There's a lot of evil about. Have you noticed that when people talk about evil, they're always talking about someone else?
I'm just worried they might be talking about me. But
no, I'm responsible for my own.
Now, so you had these parents, they weren't very well, and your mum she had trouble with her moods. Would that be...
Yes, well, she was later diagnosed with schizophrenia. Yeah. But it got worse as she got older and got totally out of control. But we were actually afraid of her when we were children, because she could be very kind and loving in one moment, and then the next she'd be waiting behind the door with a strap and lay into us because she would say that God had told her that we were talking about her. And it was strange things that children did not understand. So we were quite afraid of her when we were young.
And as you've been...
And, people avoided her because she was odd, and she must have been very lonely.
It's very sad, really, isn't it? And
it is sad.
Yeah.
Except that in the last 12 years of her life, she was properly diagnosed, and she was given an injection, a lithium injection, which suited her very well, and she became our mother in the last 12 years of her life.
That's such a good, encouraging thing to hear, that mental illness can be helped, and that's great.
It's probably the hardest illness of all, actually.
Yes.
Because people tend to avoid people who don't fit in socially, don't they?
Now, in that your mother was religious and yet she was also scary. She was scary with it. Yeah, it didn't warp your ideas about what religion would be like? You didn't get an idea that,
No, it made me process. I processed what she was talking about. They talked about the devil a lot, of course, and I can remember because we would have to say prayers every night, and I enjoyed doing that. But when I was about 8 years old, I used to say in a whisper, I'd ask God to make the devil good, because I thought that would solve everybody's problems.
Now, that is a wonderful ambition. These
days, I'd probably call the devil the ego.
The ego?
The ego. It's the selfish me first instinct in all of us.
Wow. And
I'm aware of the people who really cause suffering in the world believe they're absolutely right, don't they?
It's a dangerous thing. The righter you feel you are, the wronger you can be too, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Now, you got traipsed through a lot of schools, and you didn't find reading very easy.
Not to begin with, no. Partly it was because I was a visual learner, and we had that an old system where you got letters, then you got two letters together, and then you got chunks, what they called chunks, and then you got single words, longer words. There was no meaning to learning.
And what turned the key for you then? What unlocked it?
When I was 9 years old, we were given books from the National Library, and the book about the little duckling, Ping, was Marjorie Wise and Kirk Flack did this beautiful book in about 1936. It was published, and it's still in print, about a little duckling that gets lost on the Yangtze River. Now, I must have been absorbing some kind of skills in reading. Other children in the class got novels like Treasure Island and Alice in Wonderland and Winnie the Pooh and so on. But I got this picture book, and I read it from beginning to end. I had this amazing adventure in the safety of my desk and chair in my class. And when I finished, I couldn't bear to leave the story, so I did what most children do when they like a story. I went back to the beginning and read it again. Now, I know this sounds odd, but I made this amazing discovery. It was exactly the same with the second reading. I had discovered the constancy of print. Before that, I'd had stories told to me, and you know how adults are when they tell stories. I had aunts who would read little stories and leave out bits, or else make up stories which were different every time.
So the pages don't cheat. They give you the whole.
They don't.
They give you the whole story.
Now, it seemed to me that after that I became an instant reader. Now, I know that didn't happen, but what happened was I discovered that reading accessed story, and I loved story.
And that fired up stories in your own head. When did you start writing? About the same time?
Well, I had a lot of encouragement when I was about 11 or 12, encouragement from my teachers, because reading overflows. When children read a lot, that tends to overflow as their own writing. And also I'd say to teachers now, look, if the children are obviously writing derivative stuff and it looks like Harry Potter or it looks like their video games, don't worry, because they don't have the experience of life to create their own stories yet. They will take stories they love and they will embroider them and make them their own.
One of the lovely things I heard you do when you're teaching children to read is to hear their stories about themselves and then write a story about them.
Yes.
Because they love to read about themselves.
They do. I started writing for children when my son Edward wasn't reading. He was sandwiched between two girls who could read before they started school, and he wasn't going to compete. But and then there were other children too that used to come in after school. Now, these children had switched off. They had met failure too many times, and they weren't going to put themselves at risk. So I couldn't give them any of the standard books they were supposed to be reading. I would start with story talk. I'd say, well, if you could have any birthday party you liked, what would it be like? Or suppose there was a big fire in your house and you rescued everybody in it. Write it down in the third person with your name all the way through it. And later I would make those into little books and simplify the language and do little drawings. Now, not one of those children ever refused to read a book about themselves. No,
it would be brilliant. It's a brilliant idea. Joy, we're going to take a break and we'll come back and talk more about your story and your achievements and what you're doing now. This is Real Life. I'm talking with Joy Cowley. Be back in a tick.
Missed a week of Real Life with John Cowan?
This is Real Life. I'm John Cowan, talking with Joy Cowley, who's chosen a Chopin nocturne for us to listen to. Does this trigger a memory for you, Joy? Oops.
I started learning the piano when I was 61, which was a bit late. I was a bit late because I could only go so far. When I got to grade 6, my hands wouldn't take it. But I could play that nocturne actually slowly. And I learned that beautiful music, Chopin, Debussy, you can play them slowly and they don't suffer.
That's a lovely bit of music. Are you still wood turning?
No, my sight won't allow that now.
That was something else you picked up, and I
loved wood turning. Yes, put a piece of wood on the lathe, and you could never tell what was inside it. Sometimes just a rough bit of firewood would have the most beautiful grain inside. So we used to make all sorts of things, goblets, bowls, lidded boxes. But I'm afraid the day I couldn't see where the bandsaw blade was on a block of wood, I decided, well, it's time to stop.
You don't want another saw cut?
No.
You got a cut or something, and you're helping your father build a house or something.
Oh, yes. Do you read that? Oh, yes. And my father never found out how I cut it. Yes, that was on a circular saw, and I've still got a good scar on my thumb.
Wow. Now, going back to, it's amazing. You've got a OBE. You've got all sorts of awards, including New Zealand's highest award, the member of the Order of New Zealand, and so you're as honoured as you could be. But back in the 1950s, when you found yourself as an unwed, expectant mother, that must have been a future that you just couldn't see. And, it's amazing. Your story is truly inspiring.
Well, to be quite honest, John, I was so impractical about that. When I discovered I was pregnant, I was greatly excited. I suppose I had always wanted children. And to actually have a child inside me was the most wonderful thing.
Well, that's a lovely response. Perhaps that's the right response.
Well, I left the doctors and I went down to the little shop and ordered maternity bras.
Straight from the doctor to the maternity bras.
Yes, I did. And so, of course, the whole town knew very soon.
But it must have been tough times, and then the marriage didn't work out too well, did it? You had a very low time where you actually tried to take your own life.
Well, I actually didn't try to take my own life. What I did, I was desperate to get away from it for a while.
Yes.
And I had done a pharmacy apprenticeship, and I knew what people could die if they took 7 tablets of butabarbital, and I took 14, twice that amount. I shook them into my palm, and I remember putting some back in the bottle in case I needed them and taking the rest because I wanted to sleep. I just wanted to sleep. No, I slept all right. I slept for 3 days.
Wow.
I was pretty frail when I came out of that. I was blind and paralyzed, but there was something else that happened in that because I think it was a genuine near-death experience. People talk about the light, and it's a most extraordinary light. It's unlike any of our physical awareness of light. There is a sense of moving very quickly into this light. And although I hadn't given too much thought to reincarnation before this, I knew that I'd done this thousands of times. And I knew the light. The light was presence. It wasn't just light, it was presence. And I was nearly there, and then I started to fall back, and it was like falling down a well. I could still see the light up the top of the well, but I could feel the heaviness of my body around me. And I heard voices, and I was in hospital. Now, that seemed to take about 20 seconds. It was actually 3 days.
How does that make you feel about death now, being so close to it back then?
When my time comes, I will be like a child running down a hill with my arms outstretched. I believe very much that our birth is a kind of little death, and that we come here to grow, and we grow through tension, of course, and then what we call our death is our true birth.
Wow.
And I always think of hospices as being maternity homes.
Wow. And that must be a comfort to you, and a comfort that probably you've been able to pass on. I mean, you've had the sadness of losing a husband. Your first marriage
yes, I have.
ended, but your second man was a good one, but he died of cancer.
That's right.
And
yes. And Terry's not well. He's had a number of strokes. He's fairly frail. But we both have the same understanding that death is a beginning. Well, even quantum theory backs that up.
Yes.
You know, it says that energy can not be destroyed. If it disappears in one place, it reappears in another.
Now, when your second husband was dying, he was visited by a marvellous Catholic priest, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
I'm setting you up here for a story, of course.
I know you are. I know where you're going. Well, that was a way that I could keep Malcolm at home, because Malcolm didn't like hospitals, and he wouldn't consider a hospice, although that was available in those days. So he had lymphoma, cancer, and for the last 3 months he was bedridden. And I was the only person to look after him during the week, although he had a district nurse coming in once a week. So it was full-time work. And no, it wasn't work, it was companionship. But in the mornings I would have to give him blanket baths and massage him, and then in the afternoons I'd sit on the bed with him, and we'd both watch Dad's Army because he enjoyed that. But in the mornings, this priest came down and brought Malcolm Holy Communion, and then would sit with him for an hour, and that enabled me to do a little bit of shopping and to start doing meals and cleaning the house. And that priest came down every morning. After Malcolm died, well, he still came down to have a chat, and I moved down to the Sounds.
Yes.
He kept in touch over the next 5 years, and then he asked me to marry him.
And he's still your husband today, and I hope that...
He is, and it wasn't a romantic proposal. He'd been rather unhappy, and his proposal over the phone was, bugger this, I want to get married. And
that sounds romantic enough to me. Joy.
And I wondered who he had met. I thought, he's met somebody.
I didn't figure that was you.
This was interesting, and I waited for him to tell me, and then he said, well, what do you think about that?
Joy, we must go, but it's been delightful talking to you, and we'll go out on another favourite song of yours, Love That Will Not Let Me Go.
Yeah, it's my favourite hymn. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much
John.
for talking with us. This is Real Life. Looking forward to being back with you next Sunday night.
Thank you.